Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Cohen. I'm the chair of the Topeka City Council Policy and Finance Committee. This is June 10th, 2019 at 3 p.m. in the Holiday Conference Room. I'm going to call this meeting to order. First item up is to approve the minutes of our June 13 meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Been motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Review Topeka Municipal Code Chapters 2.125 and 2.140.
Okay. So last time we stopped, I think that we indicated we were going to take a closer look at the severance pay piece that we had inserted from the personnel code into the TMC. That's the proposal, at least. So you have a packet in front of you, and the top sheet is a proposed table of contents for the TMC, like a post-recodification. Last time I mentioned that the city clerk is starting the process of recodifying the entire Topeka Municipal Code. So this, of course, would just be one part of it. So if we recodified, this would be the proposed numbering structure that you would find on it. As I mentioned last time, the code company had indicated it would be best to divide this pretty massive Title II into several divisions for ease of reference. The Division 1 would just be a general officials and departments, and you'll see under there that the various chapters listed under there is just basic: seal and crest, city records, mayor, city council, established positions, etc. And then Division 2 would be entitled employees, and that's the part that we're going through right now and taking a really, really close look at. And then if you go clear back to the last page, which would be 6, the very back, the third division would be Division 3, and that would be boards, commissions, councils, and committees. So that's all your boards. You just carve them out of Title II and put them in one piece, one area. So again, Division 2 employees is what we've been focusing on. We talked a little bit last time about affirmative action and diversity and inclusion, and you'll see that that is reflected on this proposed table of contents as a new chapter 2.105, and that kind of goes through each of those various sections, and you'll see the titles to those. Again, we mentioned those and talked about those last meeting. You'll see in the red next to each of those sections if there's a corresponding reference somewhere else in the TMC or in the personnel code. That is cross-referenced in red next to each of the proposed section numbers. So you'll see that, for instance, under bargaining units, it'll cross-reference the current TMC number, 2.25 instead of 2.115. But that's just kind of to help get you through this first part of it. So that's a table of contents, very general overview. And then the second document is Title II, Division 2 employees. First part is tracking. Again, this is the first part of it is the equal employment opportunity, diversity, and inclusion. We went through that last time. So if you wouldn't mind, we will jump to the chapter that you'll see on, oh gosh, these aren't page numbered, probably the 4th page back. It says at the very top, new chapter 2.110, and it's got general in quotations and tracking at the very top of it. Okay, good deal. So we talked again about some of these last time. We went through oath. We talked about the fact that the residency requirement would be moved from the personnel code into the TMC, and that a reference would also be made in the personnel manual. We've done that, talked about how some of these rules get promulgated, and then we would skip over to where we left off last time, which is at the bottom of a page. The section number is 2.110.070. It's titled Approval of Severance Pay. You see that. So last time we were going to take a look at the severance pay provisions that are currently contained in the personnel code. if we move them over to the TMC, what they would look like. And we've done that. You've got the first section A that we basically put a title to, and we indicated very clearly that prior authorization is required. And it says very clearly, no severance or other payments beyond those authorized by federal, state, or local law or contract shall be made to a current or former employee without the prior authorization of the governing body. So it's just a very firm statement up front that you all have to be involved. The next section talks about eligibility. You'll see in the tracking, I think it's colored in blue on your pages. These are the differences between what is currently in the personnel code and what staff is proposing to include as part of the TMC. We just clarified a few things. Severance pay set forth is available only to employees who meet these eligibility requirements. So you cannot get severance unless you meet these requirements. And the first is the employee's position has been eliminated pursuant to a reduction in force. The next is the employee has been employed with the city for 1 or more continuous years of service. The third is the employee has not accepted a position with the city or with another governmental entity pursuant to a consolidation agreement. So this would be similar to what occurred when the Parks and Recreation Department kind of severed off and went over to the county. The fourth would be the employee has not accepted a transfer of employment to an entity that is assuming operational responsibility via contract with the city. So that would be the type of situation that we've been hearing about recently if FOTS took over some of the employees from the city and they went over to work for that in a public-private transaction such as that. And the fifth is the employee has executed an agreement and complete release of all claims against the city. So those would be the 5 instances where you would be eligible to receive severance. Any questions on that?
Just to clarify, Mrs. Robertson, my reading of that is they have to meet all those, correct? They're not individual things, but they're all,
Yes, it says
Okay.
and.
yeah.
I don't, okay.
So, quick question.
Thank you.
In the private sector, we have unemployment insurance. What's the role of that in government, and how does this differ from what you would get in that case?
So unemployment is separate and distinct from severance, and so if the position is eliminated and they do not have a position that they are going to, they would be eligible for unemployment, and generally the state looks at how the severance is paid and determines when the unemployment eligibility would begin.
Okay. So do we have to pay into, like I have to pay unemployment insurance for my employees through the state. Does the city participate in that?
We are self-insured for unemployment purposes, so we pay unemployment on a quarterly basis. The state invoices us, and then we pay based
Okay.
on whatever liability comes in for that quarter.
So somebody would, so we have severance, but they would still be eligible for unemployment insurance as well, essentially giving them 2 paychecks?
Generally, the state looks at, and they would start the unemployment eligibility after the severance payments end. If they're paid in a lump sum, they may factor that in a little differently than if it's biweekly payments, just as their pay continues. And then their eligibility would begin after that end date determined by the state.
Okay. And then if we have to use our unemployment insurance, does that count against us?
It does not, because we're fully insured, so we pay for what we are considered a base period employer, that length of time. In a separation such as a reduction in force, they are eligible for up to 18 months of unemployment if they don't find other work.
Okay. But we still have to pay that essentially anyway.
Yes,
so.
we do.
Okay. It's interesting to me that we're talking about severance when there's this other, I mean, it's not severance I get, but it's essentially a type of severance pay. I realize it's not quite as much, but there's an awful lot of wrangling that we've jumped through here, and I assume to meet all of these would require an amount of payment and overhead when we've already got a solution out there that covers that. So, because I mean, and when we get down to the next section, it's, you know, the best you're going to get is essentially 10 weeks salary, which is not a whole lot.
I think that it'll pay up to, is it 26 weeks if you're hired after?
Yeah, the payment amounts are addressed in the next subsection, and so it does provide for different payment amounts based on your tenure here. So if you're hired on January 1st, 2011, and after, you'll receive severance pay at the rate of 1 week of salary for every year of
I see,
service,
2 weeks.
prorated to the nearest month, but in no case less than 4 weeks, and in no case more than 26.
Okay. So I
And-
guess I'm still not totally sure why we need a severance package when there is already a state mandated severance system in place. And we're actually effectively doing both, essentially.
And I guess what I was trying to explain is that the two don't overlap. I haven't looked at it recently, but the state maximum for unemployment is much less than the average salary of the employee. So it's intended to be a benefit when it's been determined that a position is no longer necessary in the organization, to help make that transition for the individual more smooth. But the state, all of the same rules apply that would apply for employers that are fully insured. So they'll review the individual circumstance, how the severance is allocated, and then determine when the eligibility begins. But the two generally would not overlap each other. It would just be a delay in when the unemployment benefit starts.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, are there any more questions on that section? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would this apply to any and all positions that were RIF'd? And if so, would this end up, like, for instance, just say you had the 26 weeks, would that end up being calculated in your retirement? Does that get added to your retirement calculation? Or is there, maybe there's separate sections that deal with that?
I don't believe that severance severance capers is not deducted from severance, so it does not count as compensation towards retirement eligibility.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions? Okay.
There's a second piece to the payment part, and that's for eligible employees who are hired prior to January 1st of 11. And they're entitled to receive severance in according with the schedule that's set forth below, but you cannot receive severance that exceeds 1 year of salary, and that this goes through length of service. If it's 0 to less than 1 year, it's 0 severance pay. If you're 1 year to less than 10, you get 1 week salary for each complete year of service as of the date of separation. And if you're over a 10-year period of time service with the city, it's 2 weeks salary for each complete year of service as of the date of separation. Then there's a little bit of clarification as to what severance pay is going to include. It's going to be calculated using the employee's regular base hourly rate, and it does not include premium pay. And that would be, overtime, longevity, those kinds of things. And then the next piece talks about the city may elect to make severance payments in equal increments on a pay period basis until the employee receives all the severance pay that is due, or that's been agreed upon. And this talks about exactly what we were speaking to earlier. Whether employees can draw both severance pay and unemployment compensation benefits is dependent upon applicable state law. Employees who resign, voluntarily retire, or are terminated for cause are not eligible to receive severance pay. We probably ought to make some kind of reference to that up in the eligibility piece above, actually. Just looking at it, we talked about eligibility in the subsection prior, so we probably should either move this or make a duplicate reference.
So how would any of this apply to like a voluntary buyout?
Are you talking about a retirement incentive?
Right.
it would not apply. We had to develop a separate program, so to speak, when we did do a voluntary retirement incentive. And generally, what we did in that case was extend healthcare eligibility for a period of time, but it did not have a component of continuation pay. They would get paid out for vacation accruals, and then it's really, it would be geared towards their CAPERS retirement eligibility on a partial or full retirement basis.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
The very last part of this, it was entitled Accounting Upon Separation from Employment, and our proposal or our recommendation would be to just remove this from the TMC and put it in the personnel manual. It's very administrative in nature and probably something that the governing body doesn't care to deal with. Then we can skip over, again, there's a clean version of what we just talked about too, so that you can actually see what it looks like when it's all cleaned up and you don't have all the tracking marks all over it. So that if we skip to like a couple pages over, at the top of the page, you'll see a new chapter 2.115. And this would be entitled Bargaining Units. This is just a new entire chapter in Division 2. These two bargaining unit provisions were kind of mixed in with the overall employee section, and we thought it'd be nice just to kind of carve them out and put them together, just so if you're in a bargaining unit or you wanted to have any information about how this would apply to bargaining units, you could go straight to this chapter. 2.115 just talks about the right of employees to organize, and then how memorandums agreements are approved through the meet and confer process. We're not even proposing any substantive changes to these two because they were actually reviewed fairly recently, which is odd for the TMC, at least this title, but these were a fairly recent review, so we're not proposing any changes. Now, if you turn to the next page, the next new chapter would be 2.120, and this is entitled Civil Service for Police Officers and Firefighters. I'm not very well versed in this one, but at this point in time, I don't believe that staff would be recommending any changes to this chapter, at least not at this point in time. It's basically how I think the recruitment, discipline, every kind of process you can think of that applies to employees would apply more particularly, perhaps is a good way to say it, to fire and police. I don't know if that's the right way to characterize it, but that's kind of what this chapter's about. So if you have any questions on that, I'm sure the HR folks would love to talk to you about it. And then you skip over to, this is quite a lengthy chapter actually, so it's got several articles underneath it. Skip over a few pages, and then there's a chapter, it says new chapter 2.125, and this is the Firemen's Relief Association. And some of these chapters or sections that were in the code, I was very unfamiliar with, so we kind of have been doing a bit of historical research as we've gone along. And this particular one, it talks about an organization that has bylaws and regulations, and the city attorney advises their directors. And so I reached out and asked staff if there was anybody who is the liaison to this particular board, and Mary indicated that she's the person who works with them, but the limit of her role is to receive information from, I don't know who the individual is, the head of this particular association, and it has to do with, I think it's excess insurance payments that then go into this fund that can be used to do various things for the fire folks, if that's correct. And most of it is covered in state law.
Is it referred to as Firemen's Relief Association in state law?
That's the former.
So we can't call it firefighters?
I know.
Because you can't really use firemen
Yeah.
anymore, that's
That's the
no-no.
statutory name. I do know that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's grounds for discrimination.
It's in
Well-
KSA 40-1701.
Okay.
It is there because I pulled it up and
All
that
right.
statute's
I'm
there and it
blown away
has
that-
these provisions in it.
The state will get around to it.
So when I talked to Mary about it, her suggestion was, it's covered by state law, we should just repeal it and make a reference to the state law.
Oh, that's an excellent
As the
idea.
state law changes,
Yeah.
then that process changes, so
Well,
we
then it's
might look
not-
a little
we're
bit
not
further
referencing
into that.
then. Yeah.
And then the next chapter is the chapter that's called benefits. And this is really interesting. This has got us going on a lot of historical research projects. The first provision talks about increase in payments under the 1939 retirement system. Well, it says wisdom, but it's supposed to be system. So I guess my question initially was, why is there reference to a 1939 retirement system in the code still? And so we've got one of the interns doing some research on that, but I don't know that this particular section is probably needed anymore, depending on what that research reveals, but.
Well, according to this, it was abolished on April 6, 1951.
Right. And that's part of, I guess we don't know if there's just some kind of reason to historically have a timeline for when it was implemented and then what came after and then what came after. So that's something we're looking at. Maybe this is a good place to have some kind of time frame that
History,
shows
yeah.
what went where, when, so that we're not having to do historical research on it at this point in time. And then we're into the old age and survivors insurance. We believe this is Social Security, but we're hoping so. And there's all of these references to the Department of Civil Service. And so we're trying to figure out if that's still a department within the state that exists or not. So we're doing additional research on that. I'm assuming it's the Department of Labor, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's what it
Guessing
is,
that it
instead of the Department of Civil Service, but we're just trying to trace back all the pieces to that. So there's a lot of information on that. And then Article 3 pertains to workers' comp. And this is an interesting one because I almost think that at least the first section is really administrative. It talks a lot about light duty and the circumstances under which, folks are placed on light duty. So that seems like a much more administrative function. Then you get into the next sections. And one, it talks about assessment against city department rate. Well, we've been self-insured for quite a long period of time, actually 1976. So that's never been updated, so we're gonna have to, revise that and make reference to the fact that we did become self-insured in 1976. And as I understand it from conversations we had last week, that the police and fire came in at separate points in time later on, post-1976, and I think we're gonna
That's part of the research.
try to
we're
figure
trying
out
to
when
figure
that
out.
happened, and state that specifically in here. And then we have a rate of assessment because it is self-insurance and each department's, assessed as set by the city's risk manager. And then there's another subsection that is annual self-insurance permit required. This is something that's required by state law, and so we're going to get some additional information to put into this section that kind of provides how that process works, why you need the permit, how the permit's obtained, and that type of thing. And then the last section, which is claims for compensation, service of claims defensive fund. This almost seems like it should be moved into Title III, which is the finance provisions of the municipal code. We just had discussions about tort claims, so it seems like perhaps there could be a separate section that could be inserted into that TMC Chapter 3.35 that's just generally entitled claims, and just set up a separate division for tort claims perhaps and a separate division for work comp claims, but seems like that might be the more appropriate place, but again, that's just something that we continue to look at. And then The next article is Article 4. It's police and fire pension funds. We've conducted historical research on this. Actually, Catherine did, found a case from several decades ago titled Singer versus City of Topeka. This indicates that both of these police and fire funds were discontinued effective 1979. So we're 40 years in without deleting this language. Don't know why, but that's where we're at.
Great.
In 1979, what happened at that point in time is there were police and fire pension funds that existed, but those were rolled into KPNF?
Yes.
KPNF, which is, I don't know, division of Capers. It's part of the Capers system. So that happened 40 years ago.
So was the suit not to do that then?
I don't know what the suit was about. I think
when
it
it
was
was
about the contribution rate, the percentage of the contribution. I think it was Capers may or have required
City.
3%,
You're right. And the
3%
city-
cop.
Sorry. I think Capers did, yeah, Capers had 7% at the time. And so the city, for the police and fire pension funds, tried to match that, tried to increase. And the court said you couldn't do that because it was a unilateral change in a contract. But that's where all the historical information. So the case is not really pertinent to what we're doing, but it's got some great historical information in it.
Yeah. It's very interesting. So this is likely all to come out, Article 4, unless you guys want to just leave it in because it's interesting to read. And then Article 5, police benefit account, Article 6, health insurance. We haven't, at least I have not gotten that far yet. So that's probably what we'll talk about next meeting is those. We haven't even gotten into those yet, and follow up on some of the more historical information that we were talking about, because hopefully that'll all have been completed. And I thought, you've heard a lot about the personnel manual, and I don't know if you all received the all COT email that went out last Wednesday. So we notified all the employees on the 5th that we were going to post the personnel manual on the intranet, and we still have, we counted them all up, all the policies and all the administrative rules and regulations. I think it was 67. We still have each of those 67 separate documents up on the intranet through the end of this month. And at the end of this month, we're going to remove those, and then it'll just be the personnel manual. So that's really a compilation of all those, plus some of the information that we pulled over from the personnel code on reduction in force, discipline, and grievances, I think. Do you think it'd be advisable or a good idea, maybe if you'd like Sean, to get up and do a little tutorial on the,
If they're interested.
it's pulled up on the internet right now.
What do you guys need? Do you need me to move out of the way and you can show it on the TV and zoom in?
I think it would, will it go over his? Shannon, Sean.
No, I don't like the font.
Change everything.
Okay, first I just want to go to the city's intranet site, and here is the bucket called Policies and Procedures. Right now, this is where staff or employees need to go to find out if there's a policy, an administrative rule and reg, personnel code, et cetera, to find out. Oh,
I don't know, Sean.
do you need me to go someplace else?
Maybe. There you go.
Sorry about that. Okay, so here is the page on the intranet. If a supervisor and employee staff needs to come find out if there's a violation of a policy, an administrative rule and reg, personnel code, et cetera. So over here, we've tried to put over the years, if it's an administrative rule and reg, here's that long list of them, here's the personnel code, and then here are the policies. And that's kind of what prompted this process, is trying to get it into one location so that employees do not have to decide, was that a policy, was that an ARR, is that in the personnel code, where is it that I can find that information?
Hey,
So what-
Sean?
Yes,
On the council policies, if you want
Yes.
to pull that up,
Sure.
I know that at the last meeting, there was a question about like ethical rules that apply to council members. So if you get on the internet and you pull up council policies, you'll see that the resolution number 7473 is a code of ethics. It's very broad in nature, but that's it.
And so what we've tried to do is make sure we don't lose sight of, over the years, if council had passed a resolution that they wanted staff to adhere to, that, so we made sure that there is a link on the intranet that had for council policies and then procedures and guidelines. So again, on the homepage, then I've put the personnel manual, and then we have a cross-reference so that employees can find out if they know, oh, yeah, that's right. Professional integrity, where was that found? Oh, that was in that policy 131. I can find that in section 2. So we've done that cross-reference for staff so that they'll be able to find it. So our hope is, go to this personnel manual, and by July, we're hoping to have each of the individual sections out there available too, so I don't always have to pull up a 254-page document in a PDF and find the specific section. So we are working on that design, hope to have it done and completed by the end of June. So in July, this big personnel manual will be out there, but then each section will have like its own bucket. So section 1, you hover over it, it'll show what subsections are at. You can click on it, go straight to that section. Trying to make it just a little bit user-friendly for employees. So here is what the personnel manual looks like. General provisions, recruitment and selection, employee conduct. So we're hoping it's just a one-stop shop for staff, employees, supervisors, if they need to find something out. We're not searching all over the intranet, having to call staff, call one another, and just have a one-stop shop and can find it out. Tried to put them in appropriate categories so it's easy to find. Like, here's an example, absences and leaves. This is probably our biggest area that we get calls about is, how do I use sick leave? We've got a holiday coming up. I have a funeral to go to, etc. So this is going to be an easy place for supervisors and employees to just go to this specific section and find out what the process is for that particular leave.
Sean,
Yes.
could you click on like administrative leave there at 6.17?
17, sure.
Yeah.
So then you click on it and it goes.
It goes
to
right to where you want to go.
Right.
So you'll see that's one of the provisions that we took from the personnel code. So anytime that there's a provision we took directly from the personnel code that wasn't in a separate policy or an ARR, we just made an asterisk note and showed where it is in the personnel code. So you'll find that next to where it talks about discipline and reductions in force as well.
Still a little maneuvering to go back and forth. Yep, so every click will take you to that section, and that's exactly what we plan to when we have the individual buckets for each section as well.
Cool.
Any specific questions, comments, want to see a specific section? Okay. So you guys think we're moving in the right direction? That works? Perfect.
Great, thanks for your presentation. Is there anything else related to item 3?
Oh,
Yeah.
so are we going to talk about the boards and commissions at all? Like we have an Office of the Arts, according to this. I don't know that we actually have an Office of Arts. Or is that a can of worms we don't want to open?
Well, Councilmember Jensen, we were working just on the employee piece, but we're absolutely happy to look at a Division III, and if you just want to do all of Title II, we can do all of Title II. We just,
Well, that's partly why I'm curious is why is this in the employee section?
we just wanted, it actually isn't. So
okay.
this is employees is Division II. So, and this is Division III.
Okay.
So when you look about everything that's been kind of expanded on, that's all having to do with Division II employees. And
So we're
Division
pulling all
I's
of
just,
Division 2 out, and then that Division 3 will get named something else?
No, Division 2 will be, that would be how it appears in the recodification in the.
Oh, I follow you. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right now, all of this is just in one Title II. And you'll see boards and
Gotcha.
commissions that are filtered in between employee
Right, and they
sections.
don't, I agree, they don't belong, that's why I was sort of
Yeah, so in
confused.
Title
Okay.
II, we have 3 divisions, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, all right.
So, but that's absolutely something, when I saw that and you're setting up the different divisions, it made sense.
That's
I
all
wondered the
gonna
same
make
thing. Do we
sense.
have it?
Yeah, because
Division
none of
of
these have
ours.
anything to do with most
Yeah.
of the employees we have, so, okay.
Yeah.
All right, that makes more sense then, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all that I had until we get our research done. I
Okay.
feel bad. I think that we didn't understand that there was going to be that much historical research we had to do and all these decades back. So we're working on it. We're getting there.
How much longer do you think we have to, how many more meetings do you think we have? July 1st is our next meeting. How, do you think we'll need another 1 or 2 after that?
I think there are 2 more that are on the schedule. I think first and the 29th or something like that. First Monday and last Monday of July. I think for sure we will get done with those, especially given the amount of time that we have between now and July 1st. So again, on the committee meeting, the report out, that has to be given on the 18th because of the 90-day requirement in the council rules. I think maybe it's just a report out that we have just a few things to finish up, and then we'll be ready to provide a recommendation to the body or have discussion.
Okay, just probably right in the heat of budget time.
Well, and that's why I think this works out a little bit, because you've got budget this month and then really heavy into July. So we'll have those 2 meetings in July, but after that, it'll be, mid-August, and we'll probably be past budget. We can even schedule whatever council meeting it is for the meeting that's after approval of the budget if you want.
Okay, great.
I think we could hit that.
Does anybody else have anything on number 3? Okay. Any other items before our committee? I'd like to ask that, before we round up the personnel code, is that we start looking at discussing term limits for city council people. Nothing in particular, just, how, has this ever been brought up before, and, how did that go, and maybe a little historical information on that would be helpful.
Okay. I know that it has been brought up before. I don't know how recently. I believe that Councilmember Ortiz was on a member of the governing body at the time that it was brought up the last, so it would have been the last 15 years then, I guess.
Quite a while. Mhm.
And then when we talked about it last time at
Okay.
Policy and Finance Committee meeting few months ago. But yeah, we can get historical information again.
Okay, get that back on our committee schedule, would be good. Are there any other items before the committee? Okay, then motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.